Today we're going to be talking about chapter 23. It's all about the French Revolution and Napoleon. Now, the French Revolution established this new political order and that's big. You know, the poor overthrew the rich, and then we're going to find out what happens. And then in the resulting chaos, a dictator rose to power, Napoleon Bonaparte, who not only created a dictatorship in France, he went on to try to conquer the world. And so this is going to be a world-changing event. It's not just France, but we're going to focus on France with this. So, of course, here's France. We're calling it the French Empire because as of 1810, Napoleon is in power. And so the dark purple here you see is the French Empire. And then the lighter shade, the Austrians, are countries allied with Napoleon. And then the lightest shade of blue, like Spain, the Rhine, and Warsaw, these are countries that have been conquered by Napoleon. And then all that was left at war with Napoleon was Great Britain and Portugal. So this is a big time, 1810, in France's history. So, you know, there's even this neat story about Napoleon's end and how people have theorized that he died from arsenic poisoning. And so we'll get into that with a bit of his story of his exile and his return to power, and then his final banishment. But never mind. So today we're going to talk about the French Revolution and the economic and social inequalities, how in the old regime these helped cause the French Revolution. So first let's start by talking about the old regime. This was the social and political system in France throughout the 1770s. It was a monarchy with a king, and there were three basic social classes called estates. So there was the first estate. That's the clergy, people affiliated with the church. And while the church, the Catholic Church, owned 10% of the land in France, that's a huge chunk of land. But yet they paid very little in taxes. The second estate, meanwhile, were the nobility. These are your, well, in this case, 2%ers. So the nobility were 2% of the French population. They owned 20% of the land. 20% of the land owned by 2% of the people. Now, Steinbeck also made a great point in Grapes of Wrath. He said that history has also shown that when too much land is held by too few people, the people will take the land back. So, first estate, second estate. The third estate was 97% of the French people. Almost everyone belonged to the third estate. Now look at the percent of income paid in taxes. The French people, that is the third estate, were paying, on average, 50% of their income in taxes. 50% of their income in taxes. That's a lot. Meanwhile, the first estate paid 2%. The second estate paid none. The nobility were paying no taxes. So 97% of the people are peasants, urban workers, or middle class. Again, lumped into that third estate. They have very few privileges generally. They paid very heavy taxes. And they also had to live in a world where the clergy and nobility paid next to nothing in taxes. And they obviously wanted change. So, here's a great political cartoon. You see the third estate carrying the first and the second. And that's the reality, is that the third estate felt disenfranchised, felt taken advantage of by the wealthy. And you also have to think about this in the context of the Enlightenment. You know, these folks are reading Voltaire, reading John Locke, reading Rousseau, where he said, man is born free, but everywhere else is in chains. And they're also having to deal with high taxes, mainly caused by the king's obsession with himself and his glory in conquering places in war. And also, wars create inflation and damage the economy through crippling debt. And then meanwhile, King Louis XVI was the reigning monarch at the time of the French Revolution. And his wife, Marie Antoinette, the couple were known as the richest people in all of France, and they lived the most luxurious lifestyle at a time when the scenes that you're watching here are scenes of rampant poverty. In fact, Louis doubled the nation's debt, and to the point where foreign banks cut off his credit. So here's Louis XVI. Here's his calves. By the way, calves were apparently a thing back then. They were into it. So he liked to wear extravagant costumes. You see the elaborate robes, but you also seen the special attention drawn to his calf, because I guess that's something that people were into back then. Yeah. So check out that calf. Well, Louis was actually very good at posing for paintings, very good at living an elaborate lifestyle. But he was a terrible leader. He made horrible decisions. He was also very temperamental. So he didn't have a very good process for making decisions. He was known for throwing temper tantrums. And his lack of patience added to these compounding problems. Finally, he called a meeting of the Estates General. That is, representatives from each of the three estates. So representatives of the nobility, of the clergy, and of the people. And the members of the third estate came to the meeting and said, we're tired of you people. We're paying for you. You're taking advantage of us. We don't think we need you anymore. We'd be better off without you. And so they began to assert their desire for independence. And so the third estate, even though they represented a majority of the people, had very little power under the old rules. And so eventually they were persuaded to make some major changes in the French government. The third estate set up their own National Assembly, their own lawmaking body. And they decided to write a new constitution for France. It was called the Tennis Court Oath. And the king hated this idea of the third estate forming their own lawmaking body. Because basically what they're saying is, we the people of France don't need you anymore. We're going to make up our own rules, and we're going to shut the king, the nobles, and the church out of this. And so Louis, of course, made plans to repress the National Assembly. He's like, you guys don't have the right to do that. Come on, I'm your king. Do what I say. And so, on July 14th of 1789, France now celebrates this as their Independence Day. They call it Bastille Day. Bastille was a French prison in Paris that was known to contain many of their political prisoners. These were people that had not necessarily committed a crime, but they had spoken out against the French government, and they were arrested and held there without trial. And so the people of Paris stormed the Bastille and tore it down and killed most of the guards.
On n'a plus le choix. En joue! Non, ce serait un carnage.
Retirez-vous!
Monsieur le gouverneur! Si vous ne faites pas tirer, nous sommes perdus.
En joue! Feu!
Feu, par Dieu!
Cessez le feu! Cessez le feu! Que faites-vous? Nous sommes sauvés.
Vive le roi! Vive la nation!
À vous, canonniers! En partie!
Oh, quelqu'un! Oh là, quelqu'un! Oh là! Oh, quelqu'un! Qui est fait? Le lieutenant du flux. J'ai un message du gouverneur.
Trouvez-moi une planche! Arrêtez les tirs! Cessez le feu! Il y a un message du gouverneur! C'est les bancs, j'y vais! Mes amis, écoutez!
Oh, yeah, here's a painting of the storming of the Bastille. Well, there was there's a common concern about popular uprisings and how they can lead to chaos. Remember, that was Plato's great concern with democracy, is that it's actually a tyranny of the majority. That was Thomas Hobbes' fear of the natural state of man, is that we are chaotic, that mob rule can be dangerous. And the French Revolution is a classic example, is that when the mob stormed the Bastille and when the poor began to seize the palaces, there was this great fear that attacks from the poor were going on all around the country. The palaces were being raided, the property was being seized, papers tying them to the feudal system, peasants were overthrowing their lords. For example, in October of 1789, of the same year as the storming of the Bastille, women in Paris began looting and began raiding bakeries and taking bread because they resented the rising cost of bread. The people demanded action. And so the king returned from his palace at Versailles to Paris. So here's a painting of the bread revolts.